Well, this is one of those stories that doesn't require very much commentary, but I will offer some anyway because, that's the whole point of the show. ABC 7 News in San Francisco has the exclusive report about a firefighter whose career was ended after he was physically assaulted by another firefighter. That other firefighter still has his job. The one who committed the assault gets to keep working. The one who got assaulted is chased out. If you're already making assumptions about the racial dynamics that might be at play here, how dare you? But also, you're right. You're probably basically right. Let's watch.
The whole time I was yelling at him. I said, "Robert, stop. What's wrong with you? Stop." And he just didn't stop. He was relentless.
This San Francisco firefighter is talking publicly for the first time about a brutal attack that he says ended his career. Another firefighter charged with beating him with a hydrant wrench.
The I-Team's Dan Noyes first told you about this case 2 years ago, but now the victim has decided to speak about what happened.
And Dan is here to explain why he's talking at this moment in a story you'll see only on 7. Dan.
Well, Dan and Kristen, connected to this attack, Gabriel Shin has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit that asks a basic question. Why was the victim forced out of the San Francisco Fire Department while the suspect still works there?
Well, actually, there's no mystery to that question. It isn't even an interesting question at this point. The answer is that the suspect is black. That's the entire answer, and there's nothing more complicated than that going on. It's not complicated, but it is insane. And as the story goes on, we learn that the assailant, a black man named Robert Muhammad, got angry at the victim, an Asian man named Gabriel Shin, because he believed that Shin was talking about some sort of private matter concerning Muhammad. Now, they won't tell us what the private matter was exactly, just that it was a family crisis. From the sound of it, other firefighters at the firehouse, including Shin, were concerned about him and wanted to offer him some support going through his crisis, whatever the crisis was. And this enraged Muhammad, who then demanded that Shin reveal who told him about Muhammad's private business. Shin wouldn't say, which led Muhammad to do this.
Court records show that 2 days after that phone call, Robert Muhammad used a computer at Station 25 to retrieve Shin's work schedule and his home address, and left the station with what's called a hydrant spanner, a heavy brass wrench measuring 15 inches that's used to turn the water on and off. Muhammad drove across the bridge to Shin's home in Oakland and found him out front sweeping the sidewalk.
And then he reached into his back pocket. He pulled out the large brass spanner, and he started swinging at my head.
A witness called 911.
911 emergency, what are you reporting?
Yeah, somebody's being beat with a wrench on 9th Avenue and East 19th Street.
Court records allege Muhammad swung the wrench at Shin's head approximately 12 times, breaking his arms as he tried to protect himself, giving him a concussion. One blow sent Shin's glasses across the street, he said. The attack stopped only after a neighbor who works against human trafficking pulled a handgun and confronted Muhammad.
And then he slowly dropped the spanner and looked backwards and walked away towards his car, which is approximately a block and a half away.
So to review, this man has accessed personal files on a computer at work to find his victim's home address. He stole a weapon from his job in order to use it to assault and potentially kill his victim. He then carried out the assault and only stopped when he was confronted by a Good Samaritan with a gun. So Muhammad has now committed a whole series of extremely serious felonies, up to and including attempted murder. Now, you would think, as a sane person, that losing his job would be the first immediate consequence, followed by a host of other, much more severe consequences. But you would be wrong. In fact, up to this point, the only person who has suffered any consequences is the guy who was beaten with a wrench. Watch.
Shin's attorney, James Torres, says Robert Muhammad never faced discipline and never missed a paycheck.
You have an individual that the chief has allowed to continue working all this time, continue drawing taxpayer salary all this time, after attempting to murder a fellow firefighter.
The lawsuit also says several of Shin's direct supervisors ordered him to drop the charges and to not cooperate with the police investigation of the attack.
The first person called me and said, "Hey, is there any way we can work this out?" The second person called me and said, "You can't charge him. You've got to drop the charges. That man's got a family." And of course, I was angry. I said, he just tried to kill me.
The lawsuit says they treated Shin with startling prejudice and Muhammad with baffling favor from the outset because they saw one difference. Shin is Asian and Muhammad is black. In their answer, the defendants deny each and every allegation. Still recovering from his injuries and PTSD, Gabriel Shin refused a fire department interrogation, which he believed would be not about the attack, but focused on who was talking about Robert Muhammad's family crisis.
Within days of that, Chief Nicholson and those deputies took away his pay. They took away his health insurance before he could even recover from those injuries.
So Shin, for the crime of being brutally beaten by his coworker, lost his pay and his health insurance. The attacker, Muhammad, hasn't missed a single paycheck. He'll apparently be allowed to keep working until and if he's convicted, maybe after that. There's no innocent until proven guilty factor here either. That's a principle that courts must follow. Employers are not required to follow it, and in this case shouldn't, because Muhammad assaulted Shin in broad daylight in front of witnesses. There's not much mystery about what happened. We recently had some monumental news that nobody is talking about. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on the national debt has surpassed every individual budget item except for Social Security. The United States now spends more on interest than on national defense or Medicare, and the situation is only getting worse as big government continues to spend like drunken sailors. That's why investors, central banks, and concerned savers are turning to gold, something not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can too, with the help of Birch Gold. Birch Gold understands that navigating financial decisions can be scary. That's why their dedicated in-house IRA department is there to guide you every step of the way. Birch Gold is committed to addressing your questions and concerns promptly. Their team is always ready to provide answers and clarity, whether it's about fees, taxes, and rollovers, or the timing of the process. They're here to ensure that you feel valued and well-informed. Text Walsh to 989898 to talk to one of Birch Gold's experts and claim your free info kit on gold. You'll learn how to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. The best part is, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. Just text Walsh to 989898. That's Walsh to 989898. Somehow the story gets even crazier. According to ABC, when a process server showed up to Muhammad's work to serve him the court summons, Muhammad pursued the guy in his car. There was a high-speed chase down the highway until Muhammad gave up and drove away. Why would he do that? What did he hope to achieve by chasing after the guy who served him papers? For that matter, what did he hope to achieve by assaulting his coworker with a wrench? Not sure. It would seem that this is not the kind of man who thinks things through rationally and strategically before embarking on a certain course of action. It would seem that he's an impulsive and violent, overgrown child who does whatever he wants under the assumption that he will face no consequences. And so far, on that last point, he's been proven right. This is obviously a story that puts the left's racial mania on full and bewildering display. They're not able to judge any situation without running it through the intersectional filter. The victimhood hierarchy must always be followed. They are not capable of thinking outside of those kinds of calculations. That's because the calculations do the thinking for them. It's a replacement for thinking. That much is clear from this story and from everything else we've observed in our culture. It also makes clear the dire consequences of allowing people to live without consequences. Consequences are a natural part of life. It's physics. Newton's third law, every action has a reaction. This is a truth embedded into the natural order of things at the most fundamental level. It's also a truth embedded into any functional human society. Every action has a consequence. The consequence should be of a kind with the action. Good action should have good consequences. Bad action should have bad consequences. Now, it won't always work that way on the societal level, but we recognize that it is a basic principle of justice, and we try our best to enact it. Incentivize good behavior, disincentivize bad behavior. But what happens when this basic idea that actions have consequences, that bad things should happen to people who do bad things, what happens when it no longer exists, even in principle? What happens when it's decided that certain categories of people should live free of consequence, that their actions should exist in some sort of void, where a law that governs human society and physical reality itself no longer applies to them? Well, we're seeing what happens. It's the breakdown of society and human beings who become untethered from reality, unable to function. They act irrationally. They are miserable and they inflict their misery on those around them. Because a life without consequence is a life not even worth living. It's a life without meaning. It turns out, of course, that you can't really have a life without consequence or a society without consequence. The consequences will come. The question is whether the consequence will be experienced by the person whose actions warrant it or whether someone else will be forced to take the blow. That's what's happened here. And it's why all of the people involved in this story, except the actual victim, are today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.